Welcome to Herbally Yours, an adventure into the world of natural medicine. Here is your host, Dr. Ellen Kamai, the natural nurse who will help you take the leap to ultimate wellness.
And greetings. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is Ellen Kamai, the natural nurse, for another edition of Herbally Yours on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. Herbally Yours brings you the latest information about the many facets in the world of natural living. Today, we are so pleased to have as our guest Dr. Stephen Barrie. And Dr. Barrie is an internationally recognized physician, clinical medical researcher, lecturer, inventor, author, and entrepreneur, and is currently an executive with VIOOM, that's VIOOME, the microbiome company that makes chronic illness a choice. Dr. Barrie co-founded the first large integrated anti-aging medical center in the United States, Great Smokies Medical Center, and is the founder and former CEO and chairman of Genova Diagnostics, functional medicine clinical reference laboratory. Dr. Barrie developed and patented many of the present-day laboratory tests used for understanding the root causes of chronic illness. Dr. Barrie is also a New York Times and LA Times best-selling author of several books, including 7-Day Detox Miracle and Energize Your Life. He is a pioneer in promoting the concept of preventive medicine, healthy aging, and early intervention as the most rational and cost-effective health care model. You can find him at VIOOM.com. So welcome to our show, Dr. Barrie.
Thank you, Ellen. And being born and raised in Manhattan, this is fun talking to perhaps a New York audience.
Well, you know, this is an international audience because although we go out of Garden City, New York, we actually are also on iHeartRadio, and we have listeners all over the world as well as our local on ground. Now, I'd also
I'll change that to being born and raised on planet Earth. I am happy to be talking to everybody around the planet.
I love that, you know, as we progress into our current situation where time and distance are no longer limiting factors. Now, I want to tell you how long I have been involved with your work, because I was the head nurse with Dr. Serafina Corsello, who is a medical doctor, I imagine you know, and I was her nurse, her head nurse, for 20 years. And I was there when she and I together decided to bring in the Great Smokies tests, which we used on all of our patients, thousands of patients, for many, many years. So I really do understand how cutting edge your work is.
Well, it's wonderful to reconnect after all these years. That's great.
Yes, and thank you for doing that, because I think that it really does what you say. My life's work at this point in time is similar to yours in terms of knowing, and now there's so much more evidence to support what you talk about, that this kind of medicine is the most rational and cost-effective healthcare model.
And Ellen, it's also the most powerful. So if you look at, besides clinical experience of physicians around the world, if you look at all the research, lifestyle medicine, natural medicine is the most powerful medicine.
I really think that is true. And my life's work, and yours, I believe, is to make this mainstream, first-line standard of practice.
Exactly.
Because of everything, cost and health, two good things.
Right. And when we were both starting, obviously a few years ago, we were at the very extreme. And even though there's a lot of progress still to happen, it's been fascinating and rewarding to see how much progress has been made and how many people are using it, believing it, teaching it around the world.
Well, I'd like to bring us up to date, and your newest project, VIOOM, that's VIOOME, what is that about?
Well, as you might remember, back in the beginning, we were kind of pioneers in thinking about the microbiome, and I'll talk a minute about what that is, but the bacteria that that live in people's GI tract and how that affects health. And 30, 40 years ago, we were just touching what the implications of that might be. And incredibly, the research in the past 5 years has taken this field way, way beyond anything I ever dreamed of in terms of its importance and its effect on human health. And we'll talk more about that in a minute.
Yes, you certainly did. Even early on, we used to use your lab for a test called Comprehensive Digestive Stool Analysis, which I think is actually also still being used. And really, we did not have that word, microbiome. That's the new hot term. But we really were looking at that through your tests.
Right, and of course we had the term leaky gut and leaky, increased intestinal permeability. And when we said that term back then, most of the medical profession, laughed at us and thought we were crazy. And today, the president of Harvard Medical School uses the term leaky gut when he gives a talk. So,
right, or he might just call it intestinal permeability. I always tell my patients, say that when they're told by their doctor that the doctor doesn't believe in leaky gut, as if it's a religion instead of a medical condition.
Well, you're right, and I do have to report, though, that actually the president of Harvard Medical School did use the term leaky gut about 6 months ago in a talk, so I was quite surprised.
That is exciting. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. So perhaps it's a good idea just to quickly talk about what in the world the microbiome is. Would you like to do that?
Yes, please do.
Yeah. So the microbiome are one-celled organisms which include bacteria, viruses, phages, parasite, fungi. And they live all over the planet. They live in the air, the water, the soil, and they're part of an ecosystem that is necessary for the survival of the planet. Without this microbiome of the planet, life would stop. Additionally, on all animals, inside all animals, the microbiome lives as well. And human beings, this microbiome lives in our skin, in our ears, our nose, our eyes, our mouth, and our GI tract. And the GI tract is what we're particularly interested in terms of how that relates to both the risk, cause, and cure of disease. Now, Ellen gives you a couple of quick just numbers in terms of how powerful this microbiome is. There are 10 trillion human cells, all the little cells that make up our body, 10 trillion of them. Okay, that's a lot of zeros. But there are 100 trillion microbial cells, so 10 times as many microbes that live inside our body as the entire human cells. Even more importantly, there are 20,000 human genes. Well, these 100 trillion microbial cells have 20 million microbial genes. So there's more genetic metabolic activity occurring in the GI tract than all the organs of our body.
Right. That's quite astounding. And I want to remind our listeners that you're listening to Herbally Yours on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm Ellen Kamai, the natural nurse, and my guest today is Dr. Stephen Barrie, and he is with VIOOM.com. That's quite incredible. You might think that who's the us and who's the them? Maybe we're all one.
Exactly. Well, we maybe are all one. It may be actually that the microbes are more in charge than what we think. And before I talk about that a little bit, let me just mention, why do we care about this microbiome? Other than that, there's so many of them living inside us, so we should pay attention to it. Well, it turns out, and this is just in the past 5 years, based on new sequencing technology, that we've now determined that probably 90% of all chronic disease, that's 90% of all chronic disease, starts with the microbiome. And when we say chronic disease, we're talking about all your neurological diseases, Parkinson's, depression, anxiety, Alzheimer's, autism, inflammatory diseases, arthritis, GI diseases, ulcerative colitis, Crohn's, IBS, food allergies, asthma, leaky gut syndrome, skin diseases, eczema, liver diseases, heart disease, type 2 diabetes. These actually start with an imbalance of the gut flora.
And that is becoming, as you did state, Dr. Stephen, you're not even on the cutting edge of saying this anymore, although you were decades ago.
Right.
It is completely evidence-based. I recently lectured at a conference called the Gut Microbiome Conference, and I talked, in fact, about the communication that these microbes are able to accomplish with our own brain and actually taking over activities at times. It's really incredible what they are finding out.
Well, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because this is one of the fun topics I've been talking about recently. And this is all new information scientifically in the past couple of years, although, of course, people have used the terms, gut feeling, trust your gut, gut wrenching, butterflies in your stomach. And it turns out that there's a reason why we use those. And by the way, I might mention that the intelligence of this bacteria, they're far more intelligent than we ever thought of. They adopt different survival strategies to make their life comfortable. They communicate with each other, and you talked about that, using chemical light signals. Light signals. They actually flash light back and forth. And these are different species of bacteria communicating with other species of bacteria. We don't even know what they're talking about. But they use 5 different methods to communicate. It's quite extraordinary.
It is amazing. One of the things I discovered, which is going a little far out, but I'm going to share it for those who are interested, is that they also discovered that there are receptors on every cell that are different for interspecies communication, where you're communicating with a different species, and intraspecies communication, where you're communicating with others like yourselves. So they're going deep in terms of understanding these phenomena now.
Exactly. And this communication system, at least to the brain, is called the GutBrain Axis. And there's actually a direct link between the intestinal microbiome and the central nervous system. And it's bidirectional. They talk to the brain in our head, and the brain in our gut talk to each other 2 ways. And it turns out, this is another incredible thing that just was discovered maybe a year ago, that up to 70% of what is happening in the brain is being controlled by the gut. So what we think is independent thought, let's go do this, I'm hungry, let's do that, 70% of the time, it's not just some thought that, our central nervous system, our nerves and our brain are communicating back and forth. It's actually signals from the microbiome telling the brain what to do and what it wants.
Isn't that astounding? Oh my God.
Yeah.
One example of that my patients seem to really understand. People have heard of something called Candida. We won't go into that deeply, but basically that microorganism, in addition to creating leaky gut by growing mycelia, which is like roots that can puncture holes in the gastrointestinal tract, also release chemicals that have an affinity to the area of your brain that makes you want sugar. And it sort of turns you into this robot, sugar, and putting it in your mouth, because the bacteria are really in charge of that. It's amazing.
Yeah, yes, actually, that's one of the things I talk about as well, that our bacteria are making food choices for us. When someone walks by a donut shop and sees a donut in the window, and they say, oh, I want a donut, it's actually the bacteria that in your stomach, in your intestine, that are feeding off sugar and are telling your brain, stop here, we want sugar. It's not some independent thought. It's actually the bacteria saying we want sugar.
And what's great, Dr. Barrie, is that although this sounds like science fiction, we can show people right on PubMed. We're talking mainstream literature that this is all shown in.
Exactly. One example is in terms of say a disease called depression. It turns out that the chemical serotonin, 90% of it is produced by the gut microbiome. This is all new information in the past 3 years. We used to think that, there was no connection. So when people feel depressed, it's because their serotonin is not being produced by the gut microbiome.
Just amazing.
Actually, 95% of the serotonin is produced by the gut.
Now, we're going to take just a little break here, Dr. Stephen, and want you to know, listeners, that you're listening to Herbally Yours on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. Listen live online at nccradio.org or on iHeartRadio. For more information on today's guest or topic, email us at whpc@ncc.edu. Stay tuned. Herbally Yours will be right back.